Hi, I'm teaching this week in a theological college, and it seemed like a really good time to answer the question, is youth ministry theologically light? Is it lightweight, diluted, watered down? Is it not very robust when it comes to good Bible-driven theology? And this is a really important question, and I do want to get into it, but before we do, the more important question to ask is, if you were really honest with yourself, is your youth ministry theologically a little bit lacking? And the difference is often prepositional. Which direction do you come from? Do you bring the Bible to your work, or do you derive your work from the Bible? And if we were to pull on the fabric, pull on the thread of your youth work and keep pulling, would we find the Bible woven into the fabric of all you do? Would it be in your underlying conceptions and strategies, as well as your teaching and your interactions with young people? I'm worried that sometimes when we do that, what we find is it's something like a humanistic approach to youth work with some Bible sort of sprinkled in later. That's a little bit of an awkward challenge, but it's worth thinking about. But more generally than that, I do think youth ministry on the whole in the West is a little bit theologically light. But I don't think that's necessarily youth ministry's fault, and I also very much don't think it's limited to just youth ministry. So in the last couple of decades, biblical literacy has fallen significantly. And if that's true, we're facing not only a generation of biblically illiterate youth workers, but also pastors and teachers who just don't know the Bible very well. A study by Lifeway Research in America found that 55% of regular churchgoers didn't read their Bibles more than once a week, and 1 in 5 never read it at all. It's similar in the UK. A Comres survey commissioned by the Bible Society found that only 35% of professing Christians, churchgoers, read their Bibles every day. And a YouGov report found that only 14% of children and young people could differentiate a Bible story from a fairy tale. So biblical literacy is falling, and if knowledge of the Bible is a reasonable measure of theological robustness, and I think it probably is, then it might be getting to the point where we should stop and say, we need to rethink how we do theology in our youth ministries. Now, one of the causes for this might be found in our bookcases. If you were to open up any one of a number of popular Bible reading guides, you'll probably find this formula: a very short passage or a single verse, followed by a slightly longer explanation, usually with a focus on you, the individual, with a couple of applications about how you can change your life. They usually take about 5 minutes to read, and there's very, very little biblical digging or exegesis that you need to do to make that work. I think Bible study has become something like an exercise in convenience. It's designed now to fit in very neatly with a busy lifestyle. And it doesn't really take much relational development with the Bible and with God behind it. I mean, consider that reading the Bible in a year is seen as quite an accomplishment, but it only takes 3 5-minute sittings a day. We spend 4 times that eating and drinking, and nearly 8 times that on social media. But the benefit, of course, in our work with young people is if we know the Bible story and the narrative so deeply and thoroughly, we'd be able to apply it really helpfully and relevantly to any number of situations young people are going through. The Bible, after all, is living and active. It's useful for all that we need. And at the end of Luke 24, the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus say, "Didn't our hearts burn within us when Jesus opened the scriptures to us?" Nothing wrong with the material, but we need to know it deeply so we can teach it clearly. I think this biblical famine in our youth ministry is seen most clearly in our resources. I did a piece of research a couple of years ago. I evaluated the length and depth of a huge number of youth work resources, and I used all the ones that were sold widely in the US and in the UK. And what I found is the average length of time a teaching series lasts was about 6 to 8 weeks, a half term. And that even though the material was constantly new and innovative and changing, the depth itself was recycled. So you could do 4 or 5 years of teaching with a group of young people and cover a whole range of topics, but never actually build on the maturity of the depth of the last one, the result of which is young people aren't necessarily growing in depth of relationship with God as a result of that teaching. They might be growing in breadth of information, but not depth of relationship. I saw a horrific example of this a few years ago. I was asked to edit a very popular Bible resource for young people and I was sent the resource that the author had written. And on the whole, the session was great. It was well balanced, it was fun, it was engaging, it was pitched at the right level, all the things kind of tied in together, it was innovative, until you got to the Bible bit itself. It was based on 1 Samuel 17 and the story of David and Goliath. And the writer said, I've got it here, David defeated Goliath because David was strong, David was skilled, David was able, and David knew who he was. Was that how David defeated Goliath? There was no mention of God at all. Imagine reading the story of David and Goliath and ending up with humanism. Now, I'm all about teaching on identity, but that's not the point of that passage. It wasn't David's skills or powers or great strength that defeated Goliath. It was God's power in him and his zeal for God that consumed him, that enabled him to step up to the plate. It's about God, not David. It's God's habit of using the unexpected and the rejected and the ordinary to do extraordinary things. That's what that story's about. So yeah, I do think as youth workers, we have a responsibility to make sure that our generation and the next generation is more equipped to relate to God directly and personally by knowing their Bibles and being a bit more theologically robust. It's not about knowing good theology. I couldn't care less if you can give me a 6-point sermon on why you believe a certain type of credo baptism or superlapsarianism, but I do want to see a living and active relationship with the Bible. I want to end with a quote from this wonderful book by Mark Aston and Phil Moon, Christian Youth Work. This is 35 years old, this book, exactly the same age as me. And they say right at the beginning, there are two fundamental necessities in Christian communication. One is that we take the world we live in seriously, and the other is that we take God's revelation to us in the Bible seriously. If either is missing, the communication will be ineffective. So this is a challenge to myself, to all of us. Let's love our Bibles, let's spend time with God, let's develop the theological language of our hearts and our teaching, let's know it deeply so we can teach it clearly. That's it from me. Thanks very much.